Welcome to the Gaudium et Spes podcast. Every other week, we bring you Catholic teachings and stories of faith from people throughout the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. This is the Gaudium et Spes podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Gaudium et Spes podcast. In our studio here today with Chez and I, we have the privilege of having Sister Margaret and Sister Colleen from the Apostles of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Welcome, sisters.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's so great to have you here. Chez?
Hey, this is our first, guys. It's taken us 45 episodes. We finally have religious sisters. We've got bishop, we've got priests, we've got the seminarians. Have we had a deacon?
No, soon to come.
Okay, thank you. You're right. But okay, yeah, the habits, guys. It's a big deal. It's a big day for us here at the Gaudium et Spes podcast. So we're happy to welcome you, Sister Margaret, my neighbor down the hall in the ministry's office. But Sister Colleen coming from outside. Are you up in Connecticut?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, we're glad to welcome them. We're going to put them through the ringer, as we always do on the podcast, with getting to know them through their joys and hopes. And I'm going to get that line out to you right now. I still haven't memorized this, guys. What is wrong with me? But the joys and the hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the men of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted. These are the joys and the hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ. So you guys are followers of Christ. What's going on? What are the joys and the hopes, griefs and anxieties? Sister Colleen, we'll start with you.
Okay. I'm going to start with the hopes. Sister Margaret and I have just kind of done a whirlwind tour of vocations in the diocese. And to see the young church, to see the young people who are gathering for faith nights and spirit nights, who are doing service, who are going on retreats, who are doing Bible studies. It's just like the faith is very alive, and it's very exciting to see. And so that is extremely hopeful for me. Also, their desire to be accompanied is really inspiring. And I think that's another hope, I think, for Sister Margaret and I, is to know that like consecrated religious have a privileged place of accompaniment, just simply because of our vocation and our call to give all for Christ. So another hope is to just be there when they need accompaniment. And anxiety? I think when on the same token, looking at all that the youth have stacked up against them, just in terms of even being aware of God in their life, that our phones and social media and everything is just kind of constantly at us. And so to build up that spirit of awareness and attention to the Spirit and what God wants in the moment sometimes it feels insurmountable because of all the things that are vying for our attention. So, and ironically, when you talk about anxiety, it builds anxiety to be bombarded by what you're missing or what you haven't done yet. So I think I hold in my heart just some of the things they're up against, and we are up against as well.
Right.
Sister Margaret?
One of my, I guess you would say, joys and hopes was just the last 2 weekends. One of my roles is working with the RCIA programs throughout the diocese, and just a great witness and hope was the number of people who are choosing to become Catholics within our diocese. I mean, we will be welcoming this year over 350 people as new Catholics to be fully initiated. And so for me, that's a great joy. And it just fills me with hope for the church, because these are people from all ages, from children who are 8, 9, 10 to people who are 50, 60, 80 years old. So that fills me with great hope and joy in that sense. Anxiety. Part of my anxiety is how can we, I guess it's twofold, how can we better meet the needs of families? How can we help families be domestic churches in a sense? What can we do from the diocesan perspective, the parish perspective, to help families who, in a sense, like Sister Colleen was saying, are in the midst of this world where everything is pressured upon them? I also work with the young adults in the diocese and see some of the same things. They're looking for community. One of the young adults who's in the military said to me, please keep advertising young adult things. We one of the first things we do is go to church, and then we look in a bulletin, and if we can see there's young adult things, we've got a community to go to. So
Agreed.
I guess one of my anxieties is how can we keep meeting their needs?
Wow.
Shared
Yes.
anxieties.
Yes.
Yes, Chez, as the marriage and family life person, when I talk about families, and we do this often, is how can we better meet needs of families? And I think that's an anxiety and a dream in a way.
Certainly. Yeah. Well, I was at St. John the Evangelist this last weekend, and I saw, children and adults there, and, welcoming them into our church was just amazing. So
It is.
it really was inspiring to see all of that. So
It is.
Yes.
There's a piece of me that almost wishes at some point could we start to live stream the rites of election.
Yeah, it's one of those where you say, "Oh, you should come one time," but it's like, well, it's standing room only.
Yeah, and it was. It was standing room only at the cathedral here, and at the co-cathedral, we almost filled the middle section of the co-cathedral.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of people, and I'm grateful for the people in the parishes, and I keep telling them, those 2 days would not happen without all the work of our pastors, our priests, and our laity in the parishes with the rite of Christianization of adults. Because if it didn't happen in the parish, that day couldn't happen.
right.
So the diocesan gathering for those is great hope for the people who come, and especially for our smaller parishes where maybe they have 1 or 2 people coming into the church, for them to come to those rites and see the bigger church and watch their expressions of, oh my gosh, I'm part of something bigger,
Right.
is, I think, very important.
Definitely.
A lot of work to the days, but worth it.
Yeah. Good.
Suzanne, what's up?
Well, we're in the middle of spring break.
Yeah.
So I'm sure all the kids are happy to be out. But this is also Women's History Month. So
Okay. Yeah.
how appropriate that we have 2 prominent women here on the panel with us. And so it's just a joy to celebrate women and all the pioneers and the accomplishments that so many have, done before us and are doing today. The examples that you're setting for our young ones are just phenomenal. And so I'm proud to be here with both of you celebrating this month. So how about you, Chez?
It's Lent. It's
It is.
Also Lent.
It is Lent.
Usually it's one of those. Usually, I've had good Lents, I've had bad Lents, I've had mediocre Lent stuff. This has been a good Lent. It's just been a little. Prayer has increased, the penances, which I will not share. I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing, but they've been steady and fruitful. And this is one of those seasons of Lent where I'm just like, Lent is an awesome invention. It's just a great reset or reevaluation, whatever you want to call it. I'm enjoying it, and I'm still looking forward to Easter, obviously, but I'm not dying. I'm not like running out the clock. Like, please. Is it the 5th Sunday? Is it Palm Sunday yet? So I've just been enjoying the graces of this season so far. So
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to know Sister Colleen and Sister Margaret a little bit better.
Let's do that.
All right. So I guess, Sister Colleen, I'll kind of start out with you. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and what your life was like as a young lady.
Well, one of the sisters used to say it like this: I wasn't born like this. So, just had a really wonderful childhood. I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, and went to Catholic grade school, have 3 siblings, an older brother, an older sister, and a younger sister. And enjoyed basketball, volleyball, swimming, friends, just had a lot of positive memories of childhood. And then I went to high school, and that was a rougher period in my life. Just really had a hard time finding myself. I went from Catholic school to public school, and so that's a rough transition. And I think that really tried to put things at the center of my life that weren't helpful. Popularity, people pleasing, being in the in crowd, and really found myself feeling pretty empty, actually. And took an experience of being on a retreat in high school wherein I just kind of like wrote down how things were going and how they just weren't going well. And then I wrote at the bottom, I feel empty, but I don't know how to stop. Like, I don't feel like my life is what it should be, but I don't know how to stop. And interestingly, my mom found that writing that I had written down on retreat. She had just found it because I had carelessly thrown it on the kitchen counter, and she found it, and that became a huge moment of transformation. It's like she freed me, and her presence to me and her concern and her just sense of this is not who you are. It began this I guess you could say turning point in my life where I could start to begin to search out who I was. And that ended up becoming, you are the beloved daughter of God. And from there, finding that center and going to Florida State University and being part of Catholic Student Union, my life it really felt like my life began to just kind of take off in terms of knowing God and believing in his love for me and forming good friendships.
Wow.
And so after college, while I was in college, I met these apostles of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. I still remember being in college and going to Mass, and they were walking up the steps of the co-cathedral, and I was like, who are they? What are they doing here? And I called one up real quick after a retreat because she had given a talk. And I really quickly, it actually went to voicemail. And I was like, hi, my name is Colleen. And I really think that I want to learn more about your order. And I was wondering if you'd be my spiritual director, and goodbye. You know? And she called me back very quickly.
Yes.
And it just took off from there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Neat. So you are familiar with our diocese and our area a little bit.
Yes, and I was
Yeah.
actually invited several years ago to come back and teach at St. John Paul II High School in Tallahassee. So I taught there for 3 years.
Okay.
So awesome to see the full circle
Yes.
and begin to minister to the people, to the diocese that minister to me and help
Okay.
me find my vocation.
Very cool.
Well, neat. Well, Sister Margaret, where did you grow up and how did your journey begin?
I'm a Midwesterner. I
Okay.
grew up in St. Louis, Missouri.
Okay.
In a Catholic family. Always aware that my parents did things for others. And just the accepted. You went to Mass, you went to church, went to a Catholic school, went to a Catholic high school, actually run by the Apostles of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. But I had a different religious congregation in elementary school. And at one point when I was in high school, my older sibling, only sibling, entered the Sisters of St. Joseph, another religious congregation. It wasn't for her. So it is, God has his ways and will. Did all the sports things, loved the ice skating in the winters in St. Louis and so forth. And then I was in high school, and we used to have this kind of retreat days, right, of Holy Week. And it happened to be a very lovely time in St. Louis. The weather was perfect. Weather in round Easter in St. Louis can be horrible or lovely. And I was outside, sort of sunbathing while we were supposed to be praying, okay? And got thirsty and said, I need to go get a drink of water. And then inside said, well, you're really supposed to be on retreat. Maybe you should stop in the chapel. So I stopped in the chapel, and to this day, I have no idea how long I was there. I have no idea what I actually said or how God was speaking to me. I just knew my life was going to be different. I had no idea at that point what it meant, okay? And I went on to do all the normal high school things, dated a couple of guys and all of this. My older sibling entered the Sisters of St. Joseph but left. And that was hard on my parents because she did it in the middle of college and everything. But I didn't really think in terms of religious life until I was driving the principal, an apostle of the Sacred Heart, one day. And we're talking about where I'm going to go to college. And she says, oh, you don't really want to do that. You really want to enter the convent. I almost ran into the parked car on the side of the road. But she got me thinking. And that kind of woke up in me that maybe that was how my life was going to be different, But then it was like, what group of sisters? Because I knew different ones, and I remember going to talk to the pastor of my parish, and that was going to be one of my questions. How do I know where? And he asked, well, what congregation are you thinking of, before I could ask? And out came Apostles of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And I'm walking home saying, okay, Lord, I guess that's what you want. So I went to college then for a year and then entered the Apostles of the Sacred Heart of Jesus many years ago. Many, many years ago. I'm that old. So it's been an interesting journey, you know.
Those are incredible stories, just kind of the Lord in various moments and various generations, the Lord coming to meet you and being like,
right,
go in this direction now. Well, discerning, we talked again with bishop, priests, seminarians, married couples, and I think everyone has a general sense of what married life is like for, you grow up in a family. People get to know their priests. They kind of see what happens, stuff. Religious life, especially in recent times when the presence of religious kind of has dwindled in a lot of parts of the country. They don't see it anymore. And if they do, it's kind of in your activities. So maybe we can peel back the curtain and see what is religious life in general, and then we'll kind of get to the charism of the apostles in after that. So
yeah, so there's so many different forms of religious life, which is really an amazing thing. So there is the call to be a cloistered sister, which is when you're tied to a monastery, a convent, and you spend most of your time in prayer, and that becomes your ministry, really, is praying for the needs of the world. Our congregation is what you would call active. So we are probably more like your typical lay people who are, after breakfast going off to their work and then coming back in the evening. I guess the difference with our life is a few things. First of all, we take the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. So we become, I guess you could say, people who are wedded to a community. And it's different from family. It's not people we choose. It's people who the Lord chooses for us. It's not friends. But we do become friendly with one another, and sometimes you do develop, friendships with one another. But really, we see it as these are the women that God has put into my life that are going to make me a better person, and please God, I'm going to make them a better person. So we talk about community as the primary place of mission, that it's not just out on the streets and doing all the things. It's being loving to one another and sensitive to the needs of another, and that is going to be a catalyst for energy and zeal for the ministry, and that it's not a separate sort of thing. They all flow together, and even our prayer life flows into our love for our sisters, which flows into the love that we have for the people of God that he puts in front of us. But maybe a day in the life, Sister Margaret. You've got a pretty cool life, so I'm going to let you go.
Yeah, our day is, wake up. That's the first thing to try and do. And then spend some time in prayer. One of the things that is consistent, I think, with almost every religious is the Liturgy of the Hours, which priests and deacons also pray. So that kind of forms the framework. So there's morning prayer, there's evening prayer, there's night prayer. So it puts times within it. But we also, generally, most religious do pray 5 decades of the Rosary every day. And a Mass becomes central to find a time and a way. And sometimes that is getting trickier to do, given our shortage of priests, that Masses aren't as available. But we do attempt to get to Mass every day, and to spend time in that quiet, more contemplative prayer of talking to God, but even more so just being with him and listening. And I think that's a very important part of it. So there is prayer. And as I jokingly said to some of the youth, well, we do eat, so there's meals in between during the day. But yes, as Sister Colleen was saying, then there is ministry. And that can vary very much. We have people within our congregation who are nurses. We have a lawyer who works with immigration. We have people who teach. So any kind of ministry that is in service to the church, I think that's a piece of what it is we are not ministering for ourselves. We are ministering in God's name to the people of God. And it can be wherever he can call you. I mean, I taught middle and high school for 20 years, and I sometimes say I'm a middle school survivor, but then he called me, and I guess that's the other thing. There's a sense of, there's a call within the call. Yes, he called me to religious life, but then there's a continual, what is he calling me to now? Mm-hmm. And after teaching for all those years, he called me to work in a parish. Mm-hmm. I was at St. Paul's for 10 years as the director of religious education. And then, despite myself, because I told people they wouldn't really want me for this job, I landed up in the Office of Faith Formation with Bishop Ricard. Mm-hmm. And yes, Chez can tell you, it's a very, very, faith formation encompasses so much. So I also work with the young adults, I work with sacraments, I work with RCIA, I work with the parish catechetical leaders and what they're trying to do. Where Catechesis of the Good Shepherd is growing within our diocese, so helping people get formed for that and what are their needs, and giving them opportunities to share what is happening. So every day for me is kind of different. I can be doing something with 3 or 4 different groups within a day. And there is the paperwork. You can't get away from it. There is the paperwork, there's the phone calls, there's the emails. Mm-hmm. And so, that goes on. And then you go home to pray, to eat. Might be your night to cook dinner, like mine is tonight. And then some relaxing time in the evening. And I think that most of us try and have some spiritual reading and just some quiet time with God before we go to bed, so we can be up in energy for the next day.
Certainly. I think it's so fascinating to hear all the different ministries that that are within your order, that you have done kind of different things, and it is a calling, but so Sister Colleen, what is your current ministry? What do you do for the order?
Well, my brother, who has a background in the Navy, calls me the recruiter.
I love it.
But I say to him, Mike, the Holy Spirit is the recruiter. I am just the person who's there. So I'm the vocations director.
Okay.
So I go around and just kind of be with young men and women who are, so both sexes really, who are just kind of trying to figure out what is God calling them to, and just be that person who is accompanying them, and then if they feel called to religious life, to provide an opportunity to walk with them.
Okay. So now, do your travels take you across the country? Are you limited to a specific region, or?
It might be easier if I was limited to a specific region. We go everywhere. Wow. I go everywhere.
Okay.
So we have we're in 15 different countries, and we have 4 different provinces. So the United States province encompasses the whole United States plus Ireland.
Okay.
So any of the United States, mostly where we are, though. I mostly go to the states where we have a presence, but we're not opposed to going to other states that might want us to come and give a talk or be part of a vocation panel or meet with students, give a retreat. We're definitely not opposed to that. But typically, I go to the states where we are.
Okay. And then you're home based out of Connecticut.
That's right.
Correct. Okay.
Well,
good.
It leads us to our next question.
Yeah.
The apostles are so prominent in our diocese, but you're not from here. And like you said, there's so many variations of religious life. I don't know if there's thousands of religious communities in the world, maybe tens of thousands. And you've got your big ones that everybody knows, Franciscans and Dominicans, and on the male only side of things, the Jesuits. But then there's tons of others that are small, medium-sized. And so what's the history? What's the charism of the apostles? Where'd y'all come from? I bet I like this place where you came from.
Okay. Clelia Merloni founded our congregation in Italy. Actually founded it in 1894. Okay. And she has a very interesting own background. Actually, she was in 2 other religious congregations, and one there was an earthquake or something and she had to leave, and another she got very ill, and basically sort of promised that if she got well she would found a congregation to the Sacred Heart. Okay, so in 1894 she founded the Apostles with a few sisters, and actually at one point Bishop Scalabrini, the Scalabrini fathers, kind of took her a little under his wing. But she always had that missionary and work with the poor. She founded orphanages, took in the children and so forth, and started for single women who were working, like in a sense, homes for them. But very missionary. So in 1900, when the congregation is only 6 years old, she sent sisters to South America, to Brazil. Wow. And then in 1902, sent them to Boston, to the United States. Okay. So very missionary. That's always been part of the congregation. And I think that's what has made us, as Sister Colleen just said, international. You know, I mean, we are in our Italy, we're in Switzerland still, I believe, we're in Albania, we're in a couple places in Africa, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, a couple other places in South America. I lose track sometimes. At one point, we had sisters in Taiwan. We've had sisters from one of the other provinces in the Philippines. So I guess you would say the charism is to share the love of the heart of Christ wherever we can be of service to the people of God. So we are not limited in a sense of what ministry or mission we could do. Whereas there are some congregations that are very specific. You know, I keep thinking of the one that was founded just to work with the dying. And things like this. So that's not us. We're very broad and very general, I guess you could say. So yeah, that's part of our, not only in the United States, but elsewhere, that we have whatever I think we see a need, and wherever we have someone who has the gifts and talents to fulfill that need. So it's kind of a dual thing. It's not we're going to go into something we don't have anybody who can do it. That doesn't make sense, you know. So what can we do? So we have sisters in the United States who are very interested in special education. We have a place in Greensburg, Pennsylvania that is devoted nothing only to special education, from children all the way through adults. So it's a broadness and an openness. And basically her thing was to share the love of the heart of Christ. And it's very interesting and to go through the rest of some of her history that I'll let Sister Colleen put in some of the other little interesting pieces.
Of Clelia's history.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. She suffered quite intensely. And she, after she founded the congregation, she entrusted the money to a priest. And the priest basically took off with the money. And so, but for Clelia, she was always what she would call a woman of the church, and she didn't want to defame or dishonor someone, so she didn't reveal the priest's name. But then what happened is the blame kind of fell on her, and the sisters really lost trust in her. So she was eventually ousted out of leadership, and to make a very long, grueling story short, she felt it best to leave the congregation. So she was in exile in a little hill country in Italy called Roccagiovane for about 12 years, living with a few sisters who always stuck by her side and believed in her. And the congregation eventually wrote to her and said, we would like you to come back because we need canonical approval, and it looks really bad if our foundress is in exile. So not like a sorry things went south, sorry we blamed you, but like we need you back because like we want to move on.
Oh, gosh.
And what's fascinating is she wrote a letter to Padre Pio to kind of receive some advice. And we have the letter she wrote to Padre Pio, but we don't have the letter that he wrote back to her. But all we can deduce is that he encouraged her to, in humility, go back. Because that's what she did. And she showed up at the doorstep with a suitcase in her hand, and she said, where would you like me to go? And so this is our foundation. It's the Sacred Heart is a place, and Jesus' heart is a place of great love but great sacrifice. And Clelia just set the stage for who we would be and who we are.
Padre Pio, another man of the church who suffered persecution at the hands of the church, had no faculties for a number of years as he was under investigation. So you hear these stories a lot in the founding of congregations, the splits and divisions that can happen, the acrimony that usually surrounds this founder, who's a person of sanctity and usually kind of uncommon charism and uncommon virtue, and sometimes that rubs people the wrong way, and you just kind of the people can't handle it. So she was just beatified, though, right? So
Yes.
the church got her in the end. All right, it's been 100 years. You're good to go now. That must have been an amazing moment for y'all.
It was, and part of that whole process, of course, is miracles in her name. And then part of her story also is she was buried in Rome, and the cemetery where she was buried was bombed during World War II. Mm-hmm. But they did find the coffin and find the body, which was basically mostly still intact. Mm-hmm. And so we're talking, she died in 32, I believe, right? And so we're talking a good 15 years later, and the body is still basically intact. It was brought then to the mother house and put sealed into a wall. Mm. And then when the process of beatification came about, they exhumed it again, and it was still basically intact. So it is now in a glass coffin in our general aid. Wow. So it's quite a story that way, which is the sense of her. The church looks at that as part of the sense of her sanctity, along with the miracles. And yes, now we are hoping that one of the things we believe is a miracle will now lead to her actually becoming a saint.
Nice.
So
wow.
Yeah. That's amazing.
It's an amazing story, and you can't help but think of the humility of the willingness to listen to where God wanted her and what God wanted, whether it was leave for a while and then come back or whatever. And I think that's just part of all of religious life, is how we have to try to listen to what is the voice of God calling us to.
Well, it sounds like what you two both did, and that got you to where you are today. So, but Sister Margaret, getting back to the rich history of your order within our diocese, we've got you here. We have Sister Kirsten at Catholic High. We've got Sister Margaret Ann over at St. John the Evangelist School. So, how long has your order been within the diocese? And,
we came in 1986 to serve at St. Paul's Parish. We had a principal, someone teaching, and someone part teaching and starting to do some youth ministry. We continued at St. Paul's. I came there then to teach, and in the process, I had also often in parishes where I was teaching, worked religious education. It was just kind of understood. You taught the religious education in the parish along with teaching in the school, but I had in a couple of cases also directed it and led it. So at one point, Monsignor Syndic said the person doing it was leaving, and would one of the sisters do it? And they told me it was a small program. So I said, okay, well, it grew. It was the time of growth at St. Paul's. And so that's when I moved in to faith formation. But the second or third year I was here, Sister Kirsten came to teach at Catholic High and then became principal. And then we had Principal Sister Elizabeth Knight was at Sacred Heart Cathedral as principal for a while. Sister Barbara Ziffoli was at Little Flower for a while. And then the opportunity when John Paul II was opening at the high school, we had 3 sisters come to teach in the high school and be present in the high school. And then for a while we had one of our sisters be principal. And so, yes, we got it. For me, that was very nice because I had a place to go when I would travel over to Tallahassee. So, yes, we've had a rich history within the diocese of being part of it. And it has been a pleasure, and it's been a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to serve in the diocese.
Yes.
And the people have been so welcoming. I think Sister Colleen would affirm that right now. I mean, yesterday when we were in Tallahassee, people that I haven't seen for 2 or 3 years just came up. Hello, so good to see the sisters and all. This morning we went to St. Paul's for Mass, and it was like, oh, the sisters, So the diocese and the people have always been very warm and welcoming, and I think that has made, for us, the ability to minister mean so much and be so much easier.
And even I just have to tell the gas station story from yesterday. We were driving home from Tallahassee to Pensacola. We stopped at a gas station, and I went to use the restroom, and I came out, and this guy was like, "Hi, sister," and saying hello. And then this other woman ran across the parking lot, and she was like, are you a real sister? I said, yes. And she said, would you pray with me? And she just started listing out all these needs, and her friend too, and we just prayed together. And I was like, this is amazing. I could tell it was probably not, they were not Catholic, but they had this sense of who we are and what we stood for. And it was just a great moment of openness.
Yeah. And while she was doing that, I was filling the car with gas. And of course, naturally, wasn't working to get the receipt. So I went in to get the receipt. And this happens to me often across the diocese. I'm thanking them for giving me the receipt. And they say to me, thank you for all you do. And I'm sure most of them, yes. I mean, especially out in the middle of our diocese, are not Catholic. So there is that recognition, and I think that's part because we do wear the habit.
Yeah, I would agree. I've met other orders that wear plain clothes, and it is hard to know who they are, what they're doing, but you are distinctive and that you do stand out. And I think that's a very beautiful thing, too. And it's a very proud thing, I'm sure, that you get to wear this and be out there and do all of it. So, good.
It is recognition. When I go to visit parish religious education programs, for many of the children, I'm the first religious.
Right.
And I've had them say to me, are you really a sister? Are you really real? And I go, yep, all of me right here. And then I've had the little ones come up and hug my legs because they've just never experienced. And so I guess you'd say that's another one of the joys.
Certainly.
Of all of it.
Yeah. And I know you've traveled across our diocese here, so I'm sure you've received some very odd questions, some interesting questions, some funny questions from a lot of our youth in the diocese. Would you care to share?
So my favorite one was this young man said, and which is great because it meant he was paying attention. He was like, sister, so if you see a cute guy, do you experience attraction? I was like,
Getting to the point.
Yes, getting to the point. Or he's like, what do you do? But so in other words, to be able to share that we're human beings is also always a wonderful thing to be able to express. But that made me laugh.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. That kind of question is often, I'll get it because we're by the beach and all. Yeah, do you ever go to the beach? do you wear that when you're down at the beach? No, I don't. So, part of the funny questions are sometimes the human questions.
Yes, certainly. Yeah.
How many habits do you own? How many times do you have to do laundry and stuff? Yeah.
Good question. Yeah.
That's rhetorical. You don't have to
Okay, I
answer
was like,
that.
do you really mean that?
But I think some people are like, do they wear the same thing every day? How many? Anyhow, it speaks to. I think there's implicit trust. Anytime somebody sees, I went to Catholic school in Pennsylvania in the late '80s, early '90s before we moved down to Florida, and it was sort of a last some of that dying generation of where nuns ran all the schools. And I remember Sister Patrice was our principal, and she kind of had that more the old iron fist, but I still trusted her. Even if she was harsh or something like that, I was like, I just trust you. I feel like I could talk to you. I never did. I was 6 years old or 7 years old, but there's just something about that, that goes along with, a child coming up and grabbing your leg. And there's something that God has placed in the life of religious sisters that is unique, I think, in the church in that sense. And maybe to wrap up, just to talk about that, Sister Colleen being vocation director, some people might think, oh gosh, being a sister is just kind of like the female version of being a priest or something like that. But it's not. It's a different life, and you're saying yes to these 3 vows and this life where you don't get to choose your roommates. And maybe if you had a traumatic experience as a college where you got a random roommate and you were like, oh my gosh, how do I get rid of this person? And they could be years for you all. Not that that's the case, but how do you concretely discern such a unique life and a way of perfection to follow Christ?
It's a great question, and a question that a lot of young people have. I think a lot of people say, how do I know if it's my voice or if it's God's voice? Which I think is a really helpful question too. And so one of the first things I talk about is prayer, just actually spending time with God in the quiet and letting yourself feel the desires of your heart. Where do I feel drawn? Sometimes vocation directors talk about the difference between the push and the pull factors. So like a push factor to get married might be something like, well, I'm not getting any younger, or my parents really want me to marry so-and-so. So that's like a push factor. There's a little bit of a lack of freedom. Whereas in a pull factor is like, I really like this person. I feel like I'm better when I'm with them. So even in context of religious life, when you sit in the silence, you start to see what are the longings of your heart. And if I was speaking to a young woman last night and I just said, picture yourself as a nun. Just imagine yourself as a nun. What's going on in you? Does that feel good? Does it feel like you want to run away from that immediately? So prayer. Another big thing is spiritual direction. When you're really getting serious about discerning a call to religious life or to marriage, maybe also to marriage, to be able to talk to a spiritual person about it, just to have a little bit more accountability. The sacraments is huge. So going to Mass, going to confession, again, just really pursuing a life where you feel that God can really give you all of the support that you need. And then also, Sister Margaret talked about it with like spiritual reading. It's like just really investing and spending time with the saints and with the church and just getting to know your faith better. And then the last two things I'd say is service, because it takes you out of yourself. And sometimes in discernment, you can really get wrapped up in your own brain, right? And there's this thing called the perpetual discerners. You've got to eventually get off the fence and make a choice, when the time's going to come. But when you serve, you kind of get out of yourself and you see, like, do I feel called to a life wherein I can give myself not exclusively to one person and a family, but rather do I feel called to give my heart to the world and to be free to do that? Because that is what a priest does. That's what a religious does. And then the last thing is go and see. So go out, visit places, because as you know, you can't marry someone without dating them. Like without spending time with them and seeing who they really are in the good times and the bad. So as sisters, you need to see us in our day-to-day life, the good times and the more difficult times, to be free to make that choice of entrance.
If I could ask one follow-up question, do you when you meet with women, do you start from a default of you're probably called to a married life, but you might be called out into this more, or do you kind of do like a more neutral, like, go the marriage route, how do you, that's something I've always wanted selfishly as a marriage and family life guy, like what's the baseline, kind of how you approach things?
I think I take it from more of that neutral place. And a wise woman said to me once, when a young woman comes to you and says, I think I'm called to religious life, she says, great, have you discerned marriage? Like, to make sure that a person isn't running away from something, because it is the more natural vocation. It is the one that more people are going to be called to. Religious life is a very specific, more rare call. And so you kind of want to sift through, what are the fears? What are the things that maybe you haven't faced? So I frequently ask, tell me about your relationship with guys. Who have you dated? Or, tell me about your friendships. You really go to those natural human places, because religious life can very easily be seen as an escape from suffering. And I think people come and they don't realize that that's what they're looking for. But after chatting a little bit, you start to see, this feels more like an escape route rather than an authentic call.
Yeah. Well, we are so blessed that you listened and answered the call. And thank you for your selfless service to our community, to everyone, to the world. It's just so inspiring. And I hope that there are young women out there that are listening to this and, that they're listening for the call too, and that they can join you in your extremely important mission that you have. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. Thank you for having us.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Testimony of the beauty of the gift that God has placed in the Church of female religious life specifically. So, guys, we are blessed to have episodes like this. We're going to be back in 2 weeks' time, shifting gears again. We're going to turn it over to Bishop again as he continues his exploration of Vatican II documents. So we'll see you then.
Thank you for tuning in today to the Gaudium et Spes podcast. If you would like to know more about our podcast, please visit gaudiumetspes.net or go to ptdiocese.org and click the button that says podcast. If you listen to the audio version from an app such as iTunes, Stitcher, or Spotify, be sure and rate, review, and comment. If you watched us on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe or leave us a comment there as well. Thank you for joining us.